Hey guys, this is the second video of my series on mixing for dummies, quote unquote. Don't trademark me. So today we're going to be going over compression. We're going to be talking about what it is, how to use it, how to better level everything out to be one consistent nice volume, add some glue, how to bring your guitars up in the mix and feel more in your face, stuff like that. So without any more time wasted, I'll just go ahead and get into it here. So I tend to use distressor a lot. I use it quite literally on everything. Well, I'm going to use that as well as FG Gray here for this video. You do not need to use exclusively these plugins. Like I said in the last video, there's thousands of different plugins that you can use, free, paid, whatever you want. With that being said, these are what I'm comfortable with. Use what you're comfortable with. Don't buy something just because I'm showing you. So what these controls do. So this is the attack, so basically how fast it's going to be hitting your signal. If you want it to be instant, you would obviously have the fastest attack. If you want it to have more time before the compression actually activates, then you're going to want a slower attack time. The release, I hover mostly around fast release because I just want it to punch and that's it. But slower releases can be very useful for a plethora of things, such as like really fast double kick drums, because it'll start really strong and then it'll kind of level out so it's not too unbearable in the mix. Threshold is basically how hard you want to hit the compressor. So how it's basic. You can think of it almost like an input knob. The higher the input, the harder the compressor is going to be working. So just keep that in mind for threshold. Ratio, this is kind of numbered weird, where it's like 3.5, 4, 5, but usually it's something more on the lines of like 2 to 1, 3 to 1, 4 to 1, and so on. And what that basically means, so for example, 4 to 1 is very common on mastering chains. So the way the ratio works is if it's 4 to 1, if it goes 4 decibels above that threshold, you're going to make it go down by 1. So you're still going to get that initial attack or the transient, and then it's going to slam it back down. You can go really crazy with it, like 20 to 1. I see on Distressor there's like a nuke option that's basically just limiting at that point, but it's really, really strong compression. There's not on everyone, but there is a high pass filter that's basically cutting off anything below 60 hertz from even touching the plugin or the compressor. There's makeup gain, so if you're taking away too much volume, you can push it back up. If you're adding too much volume, you can pull that back down just to be more level. And the mix knob, I always keep it at 100, but you can do some parallel compression stuff, which is basically a percentage of how much of the affected signal you want to be back into your signal. So I'm going to go ahead and just play this without any of the bus compression and show you kind of what it's doing. So this is what it's like before. And then with it on. So you can see that when I turn it on, everything kind of glues together and everything kind of just gets pushed forward into your face, kind of fills out everything else. When I had it off, the kick drum was a little too loud, the snare was definitely too loud, but because those things are above the threshold that I set, it's pushing it back down and making it more even and more balanced. And what it's also doing is it's taking everything that's quieter, bringing it up to that threshold. So again, making everything more balanced and level, making it more polished, if you will. And just for fun, I'm going to go ahead and put this compressor at its absolute most extreme settings, just so you can kind of hear what compression really is doing, rather than kind of showing you an A/B, because compression can be very, very hard to hear. And a good way to kind of learn compression is push it to the absolute extreme, listen to what it's doing, see if you like some qualities of it, and then dial it back to a more reasonable state. So when I was learning to use this compressor, I would just take the threshold and throw it all the way to -50, which is the max, and hear what it was doing. And then we can mess with the ratio. And you can hear how it's getting more punchy, a bit more transparent. But I liked the balance of the 4 to 1. And so from there, all honestly that I was doing was pulling this back to where I thought it sounded like how I heard it in my head. So I'll go ahead and just do that again here. Perfect. And you can see here the needle is only really moving when the kick drum and the snare drum is hitting. And that is a good rule of thumb for metal, in my opinion. Metal is two things, the guitars and the drums. So when you want a loud kick drum to support the bass and the guitar to make them feel more impactful, you want it to be loud, but it's really hard to find a balance. So if you just make it a little bit louder and slam it back down with the compressor, way easier of a time. Same with the snare. The snare, you don't want it to be drowned out in the mix. Make it a bit louder, slam it back down with the compressor. Those aren't necessarily perfect fixes, but I just have the best results with that myself. I will move on to a distressor instance I have that'll be on my kick drum. I can show you what that's doing. So I'll solo that out. So as you can see, there's the ratios right there, some extra buttons, never really mess with those. The input or the threshold, the attack, release, and output. So even though this is a very different style of plugin, it's a very different layout, it's still the same general concept. You're always going to have threshold or input, attack, release, and ratio. So I'll just throw in another one, bypass that one just so I can keep the settings. But I will just, again, I'll take it to the extreme and dial it from there. So let's begin. That would obviously be way too much. You can see when I have it on the fastest attack, it gets really, really punchy. If I go on the slowest, it's catching that initial punch and bringing it to a more manageable level. So I'll just keep it around 5 just because I'll try something different. And release. Fastest release, it's more taming the entirety of the signal because it is a kick drum and it's kind of just killing the ambience of the kick drum, which I don't like. And for the release, this one is kind of weird on this plugin. The 0 would be the fastest and 10.5 on this plugin particularly will be the slowest. So that was a bit of a weird step for me. Anyway, 10, you're going to hear that it's completely destroying the ambience of the kick. You can see that it's not really letting the meter down. And so it's just keeping that level of compression the whole time. And on the fastest, you can see it's just instantly going back, allowing that initial punch to poke right back through every hit. Output, again, just if you're adding too much volume, take it away, and so on and so forth. Then the ratio, I typically hover around 4.4 to 1 for kicks as well. I don't really have a method to this. I just kind of go through and listen to what I think sounds best. And you'll notice that when I change the ratio, you're going to see the meter react differently. So 1 to 1 is basically no compression at all. So it's not going to do anything that's really loud. 2 to 1. You can hear right there, it's starting to get a lot meatier, a lot more low end through there. So yeah, I typically hover around 4 to 1. I'm not going to go too far into these buttons here just because they're not necessarily compression focused. It's more just extra bells and whistles. There is some plugins that have a knee function, which is basically telling the compressor how you want the compressor to react to where it actuates. So you can kind of just adjust if you want it to be more gradual, more like sharp, if you want it to be instant, or if you want it to be like a smooth transition into the compressed signal. I don't have any of those, so I can't really demonstrate it, but there is a plethora of different plugins or emulations of different styles of compressors, and different compressor styles do have different sounds or qualities that would be better suited for one instrument over the other. So this video isn't really going to go too much in depth because for compression, I really feel like to actually learn a compressor, you can't watch. It's one of those things, unfortunately, where you just have to really experiment with. And while I did show you the basic functions and how I use them, it was more it was more of me just trying to show you my way of learning how to hear compression. Just to recap, if you get everything to the extreme, the most insane settings you can possibly put on in terms of the threshold or input, you will hear what the compressor is doing. And you will be able to hear, okay, this ratio has more punch, and I do need more punch out of this mix. So you dial that in, hold the threshold back as far as you need it to go. And one thing to keep in mind is less, sometimes, most of the time in compression, is more. Unless you're dealing with vocals, vocals require an insane amount of compression. Keep that in mind as well. That's it for this video. If you liked it, leave it a like, subscribe if you want to. You can check out my Patreon shop, check out all of my stems, multi-tracks, if you want to mix along with my projects or my videos. And yeah, that's enough shelling for me today. I'll see you guys next time.